So today we're looking at soft pastels and we're going to be doing a bit of sketching. I have some pastel pencils as well, but don't worry if you don't have those. So to start with, we're just looking at some basic techniques and how to get started using pastels. Traditionally we use them on the side, that makes it great for colouring a large expanse, and you can also use your finger to smudge them. That's perfectly acceptable and it's a great way to get started. You can layer multiple pastels on top of each other and use your finger to blend the two colours together. You can keep blending and adding more and more tones if you want to. Be aware though, you can end up with a muddy colour if you put too many different colours together. The next technique we're looking at is using the edge of the pastel, and we're going to be mixing two colours but optically, so rather than actually physically mixing the colour together with our finger, we use the edge of the pastel and then swap the two colours over and kind of fill in all the different gaps. So I'm using some really bright colours so that you can see sort of how it works, but you might choose to use a much more muted or natural palette. I certainly would, but it just makes it really clear so you can see what's going on. Keeping the theme of using a finer line, I'm just going to do some light little sketches with the edge of the pastel. Now, the precision of the edge will vary depending on how soft your pastel is. So you can create some really interesting marks, and you can also always smudge it out if you want to have a more blended approach. I recommend having some rags around or like something to rinse off your hands because you get really, really mucky with these. And again, you can use multiple pastels and blend them in together. The next technique is directional shading. So working in one direction can add either movement, or it could be great for doing things like fur or something textured, or just to give it a specific type of tone. If you look at some of the old Da Vinci drawings, he actually just shaded them one direction. Another great technique is cross-hatching. So by using cross-hatching you can vary the amount of paper that's coming through, so it's another way that you can be more in control of the tone that you create. And of course you can always smudge this out because it's pastel. Now, cross-hatching doesn't have to mean that you completely sort of cover the surface of the paper. You can actually spread out these cross hatches and make more interesting marks. This can be great for doing different textures or something like a basket, or maybe some wool if you just wanted to give a hint of an illustration. You can also do this with multiple colours. Of course, don't forget that you can layer and layer and layer because the pastel is quite a soft medium, so it will glide over the top. Be aware though, they will slightly blend together as you're working. It will just depend on the quality of the pastel. You can also create textures and marks so that the colours don't overlap, so you can be quite deliberate about that. And again, it can be really interesting to use for different marks in different areas. The next technique is called scrumbling. This is one of my absolute favourite techniques. So by sort of scribbling with the pastel, you can create some really interesting tonal textures. You can again mix this with multiple different pastels and colours and just create something really fun and interesting. By using your thumb to just scrape away some of the pastel, you can create a nice fine dust. This you can use to create a vast colour if you want to block in a large area, or it can be great for like abstract drawings. Whatever you want to lend it to, really, it's just something else that you can do. The last technique I'm going to show you is more about colour, but it shows you how you can block different areas in, which will make something else stand out more. So for instance here I put a yellow next to the blue. It can be a great way to help define the blue shape. You can also apply the same technique, but you don't need to be quite so heavy about it, so the lines here aren't quite so close together, but I've made sure that there's more of the paper coming through. So now I'm going to use some of those techniques to draw out this piece of lavender. It's just going to be a nice simple sketch, nothing sort of fancy. As a heads up, I'm using Derwent pastel paper. Different pastel papers will give you different effects. This one's really smooth, but personally I normally use something a bit more toothed, so it's got more of a grain to it and the pastel kind of sticks into it a bit better. But it just happened to be what I had on hand, and it was quite nice for the lavender because it's quite a gentle sort of feel paper. The other thing I recommend is using a toned paper rather than a white paper. It will make your sketches generally just look 100 times better if you put it on a toned paper. It gives it much more of a sense and a purpose. So I'm just using the edge of that brown pastel to highlight and sketch out some of the details I want to put forward with the lavender. This is super duper important. I have just used hairspray. So I use extra strongest hold I can hairspray and spray my work as I'm working. This stops the pigment from moving, it stops the powder that the pastel forms from moving on the surface, which means when I go back in, it doesn't move or smudge at all when I'm working. I actually just used the cheapest one I could find. This was from the co-op, so it doesn't have to be super duper expensive. Obviously, if you want to do some really amazing work and you want to super protect it, you'll want to get yourself a proper fixative, but for me hairspray works most of the time. You can see that this paper's got a slight tooth to it. It's not sort of a big tooth in terms of pastel paper. They're not normally quite a lot deeper and have much more of a roughness to them. This works really well, as I said, for this kind of nature sketching, but if you're really interested in pastels, it's something I recommend having a look at the different types of paper you can get. So pastel pencils. These you can use like normal pencils, you can just draw with them and sketch with them. But obviously the lead is pastel, so you can lay it down like you would with a pencil, but then you can move it and manipulate it in the way that you would a pastel, so you can smudge it or you can blend it. So they're really versatile, and they also allow you to get a lot of really fine details in, when quite often a pastel might be a bit too broad or a bit too soft. So there's something I really do recommend having around as an artist's toolkit. So for the rest of this video, enjoy some nice rainy day mindful sounds, and you'll see me use a lot of different tips and techniques that I was talking about earlier on in the video to create my little nature sketches. I really recommend giving those techniques a go before you start, just so that you kind of give yourself a bit of a toolkit in how to manipulate the material. It's something I do all the time when I've got something new, is just what can I make it do? So that's my top tip: play, experiment, see what you can do, and stay creative.